I'm Tala Lambert-Patel. I'm the editor-in-chief of Women's Agenda, and I'm joining you from beautiful Bunjalung country today. And I want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all streaming from today, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend my respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today for this conversation. And I also note that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So we are now just over a week away from a federal election, and it is safe to say there is a lot going on and a lot at stake. We are facing some real challenges in terms of economic uncertainty, rising costs of living, major global stresses, and increasingly extreme climate events. And while these issues affect all Australians, they are often most sharply felt by women, and they really demand honest and future-focused leadership. That's why we are proud to bring together these women today who each offer something different when it comes to political leadership and who are all passionate about the future of this country and have given a lot to the work that they do. Sadly, despite numerous reach outs, we were unable to garner the interest from anyone in the coalition in being involved in today's conversation. So without further ado, I want to introduce Allegra Spender, an independent candidate and the current member for Wentworth in Sydney's eastern suburbs. Allegra brings a business and community lens to politics. She's been a strong voice on climate action, government integrity, the need for tax reform and gender equality in economic policy. We're also joined by Senator Katy Gallagher, Australia's Finance Minister and Minister for Women. Katy has had a huge role in shaping Labor's agenda, especially when it comes to the economy, supporting women in the workforce and embedding care as a core part of national policy. And from the Greens, we have Senator Larissa Waters, their long-standing spokesperson on women. Larissa brings a clear and progressive view to the table, pushing for stronger climate action, political transparency, and policies that centre gender equity and justice. We know that the decisions made in Canberra deeply impact our everyday lives. So whether you are still deciding on where your vote goes or you are just interested in better understanding where these leaders stand, this conversation is for you. I also just want to note that we have had a massive response to this webinar, and I'm keen to get across as many of the questions that you have sent in as possible. The questions I'll be asking have all been informed by what you have already sent to us in the weeks leading up to this event. And I want to say that, feel free to keep the dialogue going via the chat box during this discussion. Okay, so I want to start with a big picture question for each of our leaders. And that goes to their vision for the future of Australia and how that vision prioritises gender equity, inclusion and justice. Larissa Waters, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure, Tala. Hi, everyone. I'd like to acknowledge I'm calling in from Meanjin in Brisbane, which is Turrbal and Niagara land, and sovereignty wasn't ceded here and it wasn't ceded anywhere. So acknowledge that we've got a lot of work to do to have genuine reconciliation and healing in this country, and our party thinks that needs truth-telling and treaties and voice and reparations. So that's a task for all of us in our lives. It's really great to be joining you here, Tala, and commendations to Women's Agenda for actually remembering that women exist, because we've seen a few small announcements in the election campaign, but really we haven't seen an emphasis on women's safety, women's financial security. After the last election was so dominated by women exerting our power and demanding equality, it's been really disappointing to see the issues been not very much covered in the media. So thank you for trying to fix that. Now, our vision for women for Australia is that they can be safe, that they are equal in the workplace, in all spheres where they exist, and that they're financially secure. We know that women disproportionately suffer from poverty. We know that we disproportionately are on the receiving end of men's violence, likewise sexual harassment and abuse. We're not paid fairly at work. None of the statistics are good. We're underrepresented in senior roles in most industries. We're starting to make some progress in Parliament, and I'm proud that in the Senate chamber I get to work in, we've got majority women, but that's an anomaly, and we need to make sure that that's not an anomaly. So yeah, our vision is for the cost of living crisis, the climate crisis, and the housing crisis, all of which women are experiencing more so than their male counterparts, are addressed. And we want to tax big companies and billionaires to raise the revenue to actually make sure that everyone's safe and free and properly paid and not facing discrimination, amongst other things. I'm looking forward to getting into the detail of it as we continue the conversation.
Thank you. Katy Gallagher, can we move to you?
Thanks, Tala, and thanks Women's Agenda for organising this. I agree with the comments that Larissa's made about some of the kind of lack of coverage over issues affecting women in this election. So it's great to be part of this. I'm coming to you from the land of the Ngunnawal people here in the ACT, and I acknowledge the traditional owners who have cared for this beautiful country for tens of thousands of years. In relation to the government's commitments, I think in a re-elected Albanese government, you'll see a continued focus of having social and economic policy for women right at the centre of all of our decision making. And that's the way we did from day one of the Albanese government. And we haven't seen such significant structural and programmatic changes in one term of government that have been focused on improving the lives of women than the last one. And that is partly because, we have women's policy at the centre of our thinking, not as an afterthought, but also because the parliament better reflects the community that we are elected to serve. A lot of women were elected in the last campaign, and in the Labor Party, we're 53% women. Whoa, the first time a federal government has had a majority of women members. So we've got a whole big agenda. Essentially, we want to drive economic security for women, as we believe that will help in a whole range of areas. So we've announced significant policies in women's health, in housing, in early education and care, and importantly, in some of the work that we want to do in next steps in ending violence against women and children is making sure that government systems don't perpetuate that abuse. That's a big piece of work, but one that I'm very excited to start the work on in a next term. There's a whole range of issues I could go on, and I am a senator, so I can speak underwater. But like Larissa, I'd like to get to the questions from all of the people following, and also acknowledge that new media is just such an important part of our political communications effort compared to the last campaign. So good on you for Women's Agenda for being there and playing that role.
Thank you very much. Allegra Spender.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello everyone who's watching or listening online. So I'm Allegra Spender, and I also join you from the land of the Gallagher people in the Eora Nation. I want to pay my respects to elders past and present. Look, I got into politics because of climate, but as much as that, I got into politics because of women. I was very lucky to have a very inspiring mum who was an entrepreneur, a multicultural woman, and she was an Italian woman and a fashion designer, which is fun. But she really taught me that women need to have a place in the world and that women can do anything. And she was a huge champion of women. And so, when I looked particularly at the coalition, because, I represent a seat that is traditionally a coalition seat. When I looked at the coalition and saw that back in 1996, the year after I left school, there were about 22% women in the lower house of the representatives from the coalition. 22% were women. And then in the 2019 election, there were 22% women in the lower house of the coalition. And I thought 25 years, 1 in 5, surely we can do better than this. And so a big reason why I stood was because I believe genuinely that women need to be in the room, in all sorts of rooms, but absolutely in the Houses of Parliament, to share their voices and talk about the issues that matter, not just to women, but also to provide a female perspective on many of the other issues that affect us, like climate, like the economy, like defence. Those things matter, but let's have a Parliament that reflects the people. So incredibly proud now that the Parliament used to be around 34 or 35% women. I think it's now 45% women. This is the best it's ever been. And I think actually one important part of this election is actually holding on to the gains that we've made both here but around the world. In terms of the vision for women, look, I think this is, a lot of what, Katy and Larissa have said. What do you want? What do I want for my daughters? I want them to grow up healthy, safe, with opportunities to have a good and safe, secure life and, build prosperity, look after their families. It's, similar to what I actually want for my son. But I think that the point is that we know that there are issues that specifically affect women, and we need to fight and continue to stand on those against violence that is directed towards women. And that is critical because women should not feel unsafe. And we in my electorate just lost a woman last week, to what is suspected domestic violence. We need to make sure that women have those economic opportunities. And particularly, when you start having kids, that's when you see the real disparities arrive. So that is a really core area, I think, in terms of how do we support that. And then it's also health, because I think, things affect men and women differently. And there are many, and we, credit to the government, I'll be honest, in terms of many positive things that have affected women's health this term, but we have a long way to go on things like gynecological cancers and other areas that affect women. So this is just really about, what I want for women is to have those opportunities, to have a voice on the issues that matter, but also on the things that specifically affect them, making sure that we're making real progress, building on what has achieved in this parliament to the next parliament as well.
Thank you. Look, I noticed that each of you raised the importance of action against domestic violence in your opening statements. But last week alone, 4 women in Australia were killed due to men's violence, which is a horrific statistic. But more horrifying is the fact that DV homicide rates have actually risen over the last 3 years. Last year, Anthony Albanese agreed and declared violence against women a national crisis and committed a record $4.7 billion to the issue. Peter Dutton suggested a royal commission was needed to determine the solutions ahead. The coalition has also outlined a $90 million package this morning. However, experts have already cited concerns that their proposal addresses only discrete areas of need. When DV is estimated to cost the economy $26 billion a year, not to mention the sickening loss of human life, it feels like these responses from both major parties aren't going far enough. Katy, I want to start with you. Has your government done enough in its 3 years in power, and what will you be able to deliver on family and domestic violence in the next term?
Thanks very much, Tala. And look, this has been front of mind, I think, for all politicians really in this term of government. And I think for me, women's safety is the single biggest barrier, or ending violence against women, predominantly by men and often by intimate partner violence, is the single biggest barrier to actually delivering gender equality in this country. It is an inhibitor and a handbrake on women's economic security, their health, their housing, their social relationships. It affects every part of a woman's life. Look, we've done an enormous amount in this, in ending violence against women and children. We've had a national cabinet. We've put in almost $8 billion into frontline services. That's between the domestic violence specific services and then also the legal services that support a lot of women. And we've done a range of other work with the states and territories, but there is more work to do. There is, and part of my clear plan for next term in the area that the Commonwealth can contribute, not only investments and keeping that money flowing through, but also to look at the systems that perpetuate violence and create vulnerability for women. That's come up through the rapid review that National Cabinet commissioned. So it's in our social security system, it's in our tax system, it's in the financial institutions, and doing what we can to make sure that the women who become victims of further violence through our system are protected by government. So that's a big part. The other part is really honing in more on perpetrator prevention. So, for those that are identified as significant risks, to have programs that better meet the needs of that group, and also increasing the investment in, unfortunately, in things like electronic monitoring of perpetrators, essentially high-risk perpetrators that are identified. And then on top of that, there is more that we can and will do, but I always say you can't see it in isolation of all the other investments we're making in housing. Peter Dutton did announce a package today about an online register. Essentially, that's already underway. We put $100 million into that in a previous budget. And that allows police, whether they're in Queensland or Tasmania, to have the information they need, and that will continue. But he's also going to abolish the housing programs that we're rolling out to try and make sure that we've got housing opportunities for women. So I guess the point I'm making is you can't see protecting women just through the lens of those services. You have to look at it in women's health, in housing, in jobs, in pay, in early education and care, guaranteeing women access to care for their children. All of those will have flow-on benefits to strengthening women's economic independence and therefore safety.
Larissa, what's your response to that, and what is the Greens' commitment in this space?
Well, look, I acknowledge that we have seen an increase in funding from the Commonwealth, and that's appropriate. But unfortunately, it's still not at the amount that's needed so that everyone who reaches out for help, whether it's for crisis accommodation, whether it's for legal support, whether it's for prevention work, at the moment we know the refuges are full. The legal services are still not able to answer every phone call that comes in, and there's still huge wait lists for trauma healing work, and those prevention programs are still underfunded. So I don't want to say that the government's done nothing. They have increased the funding, but they haven't increased it to the amount the sector has said they need to meet demand. And that was back in 2018 when the sector said they need about $1 billion every year for frontline response services. Now, the Commonwealth's kicking in about 80% of that, and we think it should kick in all of that. We think there's no excuse in a wealthy country like ours, when you can find money for nuclear submarines and tax breaks for property investors, that women should be being turned away from shelters. So first things first is we need full funding for those frontline services, and in the election commitments that the Greens make that we get costed by the Parliamentary Budget Office, we've said violence against women, and sexual violence included in that, needs $15 billion over the life of the national plan, so that all of those services can be fully funded. So that's the first thing. But another key thing is prevention. We know that the cultural and behavioural attitudes that are underpinning violence against women are long-standing, and they need really dedicated work. And that's been undercooked, as is men's behaviour change programs. There's some great programs that are starting up now, being run by wonderful men, but there's not enough of them, and they really need to be fully funded. Housing's the big one, and Katy's mentioned that already, but we know that women are being forced to choose between staying in violence or homelessness because the shelters are full, but because there's no medium-term and definitely no long-term affordable accommodation. So I know we're going to be talking about housing a bit later on, but if we change some of those property investor tax perks and reinvested that into building social housing and capping rent increases, then I really think we could help so many women and kids that are staying in violence because they've simply got nowhere to go. Now, we've barely heard anything, just very quickly to finish, we've barely heard anything about this in the campaign. Small announcement about fixing the tax system by Labor to stop perpetrators weaponising that against survivors. That's good, again, but it's quite focused. Financial abuse is important, but that's not enough of a broad announcement. And then tiny amount from the Liberals today, 90 million is peanuts. That's not going to go anywhere towards addressing the scale of the crisis. And it feels like an afterthought for it to be this late in the campaign and this under-resourced, and they're not even here at your forum today. Unfortunately, I think the women of Australia know where they stand when it comes to the Liberal national parties, and I think people will draw their own conclusions that they haven't even bothered to attend this forum today.
Allegra, what can independents and the crossbench do to deliver and drive progress on the national crisis that is domestic and family violence?
Look, I think the role of certainly the independents has been in this parliament is to keep this issue on the agenda front and centre day in and day out. And, and I do think, and it's not just the independents who care about this. There's, many people across the parliament who are passionate about this, but I think the independents have been outspoken on this issue because it is hugely important. And this isn't just about domestic violence. This is, as rightly as Larissa said, this is also about sexual violence and we know that those two things are linked. We know that we have a particular issue in relation to sexual violence for young people, sort of 15 to 19, is a real danger time for sexual violence. So this issues. So I think the role of the crossbench and the role of the independents in particular is to stand up and continue to speak up on these issues over this time. And I think it has borne real fruit, both I think in terms of what the government has done, in some very positive things, as in terms of some of the things that Katy Gallagher mentioned, also things like the independents are very strong in pushing raising the single parent payment from support to only till the youngest child was 8 years old to 14 years old. Now that is really important because we know that 60% of single mothers have had reported of domestic violence in their past. So it is about keeping the pressure on and then looking at the different avenues where this is an issue. And what I want to call out today in particular was that the government commissioned, and I thought it was a really important one, a rapid review into prevention. Now they've come out that was a really great piece of work. What we don't have yet is a full response to the recommendations of that rapid review and a real sense of saying, look, how do we deliver that those outcomes of the rapid review, particularly around the prevention, particularly around support of children and young adults in this space, because I think that's a significant, still a gap. And while I expect that the government's done parts of it, it's the broader piece of saying, this is what the sector says is needed. How do we address this really at a holistic level as well as in the piecemeal parts?
Okay, I want to move on to a different topic. I'm conscious that we've got a lot to get through today. And I want to talk about, family-friendly policies and workforce reforms. Katy, I want to start with you because Anthony Albanese has repeatedly noted that universal childcare would be his lasting legacy in government, or his hope for lasting legacy in government. Will we see early childhood education and care become a truly universal system for Australian families if Labor gets another 3 years in power?
Thank you for that question. Another really big, important one, and one which we have focused on in the last 3 years. That's certainly the PM's commitment. Because of the way the sector is structured, it's going to take a bit of time to get there. And that's why we've started with trying to make sure the fees, that we helped families with the cost of childcare and that we monitored how those childcare fees are costed. We've invested the 15% increase to early education and care workers because they were being underpaid and undervalued and losing workers to aged care, and that has helped to stop that flow. So in order to get to universal childcare or early education and care, we need childcare centres and we need workers. And so the next step has been our announcement about building more centres, particularly those in childcare deserts, or what's referred to as childcare deserts, but also making sure that we are paying the workforce properly and encouraging people into early education and care. And the other commitment we've done is on the 3-day guarantee, or getting rid of the activity test, which was punitive and affected lower income households much more than it affected others, and sort of took a very judgmental view about a child's right to early education and care. That is, if you're not working or looking for work, then you can be essentially a child, babysitter, and that you view it through that lens, not that early education and care should be a right for all children under the age of 5. So that's the kind of the logical progress towards universal access to early education and care, which is very much what the Prime Minister wants to deliver. But we have to build the centres, we have to build the workforce, and we had to make sure that childcare is still affordable for people, and that poor kids have a right to 3 days subsidised care. And Peter Dutton's announced yesterday that he would be reinstating the activity test and imposing that on those children, probably children that need access to early education and care more than others. They're really the ones that we want to get into care, so that when they go to primary school or prep or preschool, they're not already behind.
Yeah. But just to reiterate, so within the next term of government, the universal system is unlikely to come to fruition.
Well, I would say we're going to have to build. Oh, hang on, have I lost you?
No.
Oh no, something just flashed up. We're going to have to build the centres and build the workforce, and then they are the logical steps to universality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we want to get to. We definitely want to get to.
Yeah. Larissa Waters, I want to ask about the move against DEI initiatives in Australia, particularly under the growing pressure from the USA to reduce or eliminate them altogether. How do you see these being safeguarded under a Greens platform?
Yeah, great question. And firstly, just on universal childcare and early childhood education and care, the Greens think it should be free for all kids because it's good for the children and it enables predominantly mums, but all carers to get back into the workforce and set themselves up as well. So it's one of the 4 issues that we've said if we are in minority government with the Labor Party that we will insist on seeing some progress on. And we could fund it if we tax those big corporations and billionaires. It's just a question of how you want to do you have those priorities or not? So, but on diversity and equity initiatives, we've seen this really alarming attack from Donald Trump in America to attack programs that are meant to increase the diversity in workforces. And we know that diversity in workforces often increases productivity and often increases the product for that, the profit for that workplace. And we also know that decisions that are taken are made better when you've got actual lived experience and a diversity of voices contributing to that decision. So it's not even good economics to be anti-diversity, and not to mention it's totally lacking in humanity, and it just screams white privilege or orange privilege, as the case may be. So we've said here in particular that we need to have for the gender pay gap reporting, for example, that we want to make sure that those programs are protected and that they're expanded and that more companies are actually encouraged and even obligated to have diversity measures and to be closing the gender pay gap first and foremost. And of course, there's this big attack on the public sector that the Liberal Party had and then they don't have, and now they're kind of still committed to it, but they're saying, no, not this election. Like, honestly, it's just, I worry for the flexibility of work for women. I worry for people of colour. I worry for anyone who is currently in a minority LGBTIQ plus community, that they will be facing the brunt of these kind of economic and discriminatory attacks if we are to see the government change. And yeah, that's up to all of us as the election continues to say, no, we don't want to be like America. Actually, we're proud of the diversity here in Australia. We know it makes us stronger, better, and just a more compassionate society. So there's ways we can support that through regulation and through legislation, or there's ways that can be attacked. And we come down at the Greens here firmly on the side of women and diversity.
Allegra Spender, your comments on that?
Look, I mean, I also really fear the sort of contagion of that sort of push against women. And this is not just about women in the workplace. It is about access to abortion. It is about all sorts of undermining the values that I think this community in our country feel very strongly about. And I think, so for me, this is a real piece, when people say, what do you want from the next parliament? One of those things is not going backwards on some of the things that make, this country actually be making some progress in terms of closing some of the things like the gender pay gap. I used to run a couple of businesses, and what I've always said is that if you can create a workplace that enables people to balance the different parts of their life that they care about, whether that is, caring for kids, for parents, balancing their other things that they're passionate about or other work, you get better people. I used to run a not-for-profit working with kids and businesses, and we got incredible people because we worked really effectively, particularly with mums who wanted the school holidays off. And it's like, okay, great, our programs run in the school term. It was perfect. So I think that's what it makes good business sense to be flexible and to be attracting the best people for the job. And I think that's just in Australia, I think this is about what we retain as our values and holding on to our values rather than being influenced by, I think, the agendas overseas, which I think the vast majority, certainly when I'm talking to people on the polling booths this week, there's a real fear of Trumpism coming into this country. And I think that's certainly an element of it.
Katy Gallagher, I want to ask your comments on that as well, but also to Allegra's point about Trumpism being stoked in Australia during this election campaign. Do you believe that that's the case?
I definitely think there's been policy approaches and views that are trying to import policies from overseas, particularly from America, but they've fallen flat here in the election campaign. I think there was a decision taken to do that. I think, you know, the political geniuses behind it probably thought it was going to be very popular, but I think they underestimated the fact that whilst we're friends with America, there's a lot of things about the American system that are different to Australia, and Australia, you know, likes to protect the things that make us Australian, as Allegra said. So there's definitely been elements of that approach, the Americanisation of, you know, policies, whether it be cuts and, you know, the attacks on the public service, the working from home, essentially saying that people who work from home are bludgers and need to be back in the office. So I just don't think that went down as they thought it would go down, clearly, because it was a policy and then it wasn't a policy, and then it was a policy that they would like to do, but it wasn't the right time. It's still a good policy, just not the right time to do it in an election campaign. And we've seen all of those things play out in the US. The same with the Centre for Disease Control, you know, a decision to not proceed with that at the 2 weeks after the Americans have taken that view. So there's definitely undertones of it, but you know, we are pushing back on that because we want to protect things that are uniquely Australian. There's reasons why they have been developed and protected that way, and I think a lot of Australians have recognised that.
I do want to ask you, so during the second leaders debate, Anthony Albanese said he had no reason not to trust Donald Trump, while Dutton was unwavering in his support and trust of America more broadly. Is that how all of you feel? Is Donald Trump, a twice impeached president, trustworthy?
You want me to jump in on that first?
Yeah.
Look, he's the president of the United States. I mean, the American people have elected him to be their president, and at that level, we engage with the American administration. It goes back beyond, you know, a long time. It's managed to be strengthened over numbers of different presidents, but I think we have to respect the right of the American people to elect the person they want to elect to that role, and then our responsibility is to always stand up for Australia's national interest, which is why we've, you know, said those tariffs are crazy to bring in, that it'll be a tax on the American people, but that we will never trade off about the things that matter to us, whether it be biosecurity or the PBS, for example, those areas that are just not negotiable. So we have to deal with whoever is president. We deal with that person respectfully, and we always stand up in our national interest.
Trust might be going too far, though.
Oh, well, you know, I think the Prime Minister went on to say he's had a couple in the engagements that he has had with President Trump. He has no reason not to trust what he has said to him. And, you know, at world leader level, those relationships matter, and respect for those relationships matter. I mean, it's in Australia's national interest that we have open communication with the American administration, as much as it is that we have open communication with countries in our region like China, Indonesia, India, and the Pacific.
Larissa Waters, your comments on that?
Yeah, if there was ever a time to have an independent foreign policy that put Australia's interests first, that time is now. People, I don't think anyone trusts Donald Trump. I know the Prime Minister and the opposition leader can't come right out and say that, but he can't hold a position for longer than 5 seconds. He'll tweet something and then a week later deny that he said it. I mean, it's actually really scary. We have someone who is deeply unstable, who is now affecting the world order. And for a start, AUKUS, that agreement that our country entered into under Scott Morrison with America and the UK, to invest billions and billions of our money in building nuclear submarines that tie us even closer to the Americans and their potential to be an aggressor force. I mean, if ever there was a time to get out of that agreement, it's now. And we've said that all along, but I'm afraid that the insanity of the last few weeks has only strengthened our view on that. And just to your point about him being a convicted sex offender and perpetrator, It is so often that survivors of sexual violence are the ones that are re-traumatized, that are put on trial, that are denied justice, that see their careers tank, that are publicly shamed, and the perpetrators get a bloody promotion. And I mean, he's the perfect example of that. He's the president and he's got a list of sexual offences as long as your arm that he's been convicted of. I think it's outrageous, but it once again proves that we need to reform our justice system because it's not delivering justice for survivors of sexual violence. And we should stop promoting men that are abusing women. It's as simple as that.
You've got a lot of support in the chat box over that one, Larissa. Okay, I do want to move on to a different topic because I'm conscious of time and how much we've got to go through. And this is a really critical issue. So older women are the fastest growing cohort of people experiencing homelessness in Australia. It's a national shame, and there's no other way to kind of put it at the moment. What are the key solutions that will support women into housing, and do you commit to driving these reforms in the next term of Parliament? Allegra, I'll start with you actually.
Oh, thank you. Look, I was speaking to actually just on the polling booth this morning to a woman who's about 55, and she was just saying, look, I can't afford my rent anymore. I'm looking for somewhere cheaper, and she's expressed her deep fear that, she's not getting as much work as she used to. She's afraid of being one of those women who's living in her car. And it's really confronting for many women because they have less savings. They often, if they've particularly been through family breakup, they can often have very significantly on average less assets than men. And so how do we fix this? That is actually part of a broader piece, which is how do we fix the housing system so that everyone can access housing that is affordable. And now this isn't only true for older women, this is also true for many young people who are really struggling right now. Now the biggest issues in relation to that have to be around supply. Building supply, which means making it easier and cheaper to build, getting the construction code right to make it simpler to build, investing more in social housing. And I want to commend the government for the Housing Australia Future Fund. That is a really important investment in social housing. I would like to see that doubled, honestly, because I think that this is an area where we do need to build more social housing, particularly for those who are in situations like, those older women who can't access housing and who are at risk of homelessness. So it is all about supply. I also think, I've been a big driver and big supporter of looking at the tax system more broadly. I don't think tax is the answer, I'll be honest, on housing. It doesn't solve all problems, but getting our tax system right that supports home ownership in a more effective way is certainly is an area that I think is super important. And then lastly, it's looking at the payments that people get at different stages. And this is where you do see older women also being often feeling less welcome in the workforce and finding it harder to get jobs. And that is where things like increasing the job seeker payment over time is really important. Now, I accept it's very hard to do all these things at once. They are expensive, but that investment in housing supply is really where the heart of it has to be. And that's got to be the big thing for the next 10 years, I think.
Absolutely. Katy Gallagher.
Thanks, Tala. Again, an issue really very close to my thinking. And so we've done a fair bit in this term. It was held up a little, like our Housing Australia Future Fund, so we didn't get it legislated as soon as we would like, and that has affected some of the rollout of that. But we have 28,000 houses agreed to and under construction or in the final planning stages right now. And I'll just add in, Peter Dutton's going to abolish that. But that will have a proportion of those housing that is available and focused on women. We've also put $1 billion into the National Housing Infrastructure Facility to make more housing available for crisis and transitional accommodation. We've made some announcements in the last little while about having properties that would be available for only to be sold to first home buyers, including those that haven't owned property for 10 years, sorry. So that would particularly affect many women who perhaps have been asset poor and through marriage breakdown or whatever have not being able to own a home. And we're also making sure that our gender assessment, our gender lens that we put on all of our policies are applied to all of those housing initiatives. And the other thing to make sure that women get a fair crack at it, because we know, particularly in first home buyer programs where they've been targeted, women haven't got anywhere near equal access to those supports, and we want to make sure that we're doing that. I think the other thing I would say is we are doing the kind of the hard and sometimes expensive structural work about paying super on PPL, which won't immediately help women right now, but we're trying to deal with the motherhood penalty that many women face when they come out of the paid workforce for a period of time when they're having children, making sure women's work is paid properly. And that women are able to work because the early education and care system works for them. And, the Fair Work Commission just handed down their gender under evaluation case that they did on 5 priority feminised awards. We changed the law so that could happen because, it's all interlinked. I mean, the fact that women don't have a lot of financial assets or don't own as much property as men is linked to a whole range of other economics, outcomes that we are trying to tackle as well. So yes, we're going to be really focused on housing, and we'll see tens of thousands of houses come on board for women in the next term. But we're also trying to do the structural hard work to make sure that, Tala, when you're heading towards 55 or older, some of these problems that my generation face will not be faced by your generation.
Due to, oh, sorry, Larissa, I didn't
Yes,
get
please. Thank
from
you.
on that.
Well, you're so right that older women are the fastest growing cohort of people without a home. Before COVID, it was women over 55, and post-COVID, it's women over 45. And we know that women are retiring into poverty after a lifetime of care, often unpaid care. So that financial security that Katy's referred to as well is absolutely crucial. Raising income support payments above the poverty line is a key part of that, and the Greens just committed to that and announced that a couple of days ago. Bringing the pension age back down to 65 is a really important one as well. But on housing specifically, I'm really proud that the Greens were tough negotiators in those HAF discussions, and we ended up securing an additional $3 billion of public funding for building those homes. Now, that's worked really well, and it shows that government can do that sort of thing like it used to. So we've got a lot of plans on housing. We've said let's remove those tax breaks that have seen house prices skyrocket. So those capital gains and those negative gearing tax perks that subsidise someone buying their 21st home when someone can't even get their first home, it's just totally distorting the housing market. So we've said we would scrap those perks. And for people that have already got some, well, fine, just one is okay, but any more than that, you don't need extra help from the taxpayer. We've said that unlimited rent rises should be illegal, and that rents should be capped and should only go up by no more than 2% every year. That seems fair. And prices, we know rents have gone up by over 23% in some capital cities, including my own. We've also said that the banks could and should be mandated to offer a low rate mortgage rate that still makes them a bit of profit, but at the moment bank profits are huge and people are bearing the brunt of that. And we've finally said that government should be building homes, just like we did after the Second World War. Government should be in the business of building homes again, homes for people, not homes for profit. And so that first homeowners and people who want to stay living and working in their local area can actually afford to stay there. And all of that's possible, again, if we cancel some of those nuclear submarines, or all of them if it was up to us, and change those tax perks and reinvest that money, then you could really do an awful lot to make the housing crisis, to try to eliminate the housing crisis, and particularly to try to make sure that women have homes.
Australia's gender pay gap, superannuation gap, and unpaid care work continue to undermine women's long-term financial security. What measures would each of you prioritise to ensure women retire with dignity and economic independence? Katy, I'll start with you.
Okay, well, the biggest thing we can do that will change that is to make sure that unpaid care is recognised and valued, and that paid work for women is not undervalued as it has been for too long. So they are, where we see women super balances increase. Think about a aged care worker who's had a 25% increase in the last couple of years. I mean, that is the single biggest thing I can do to make sure that her super balance is better than it was going to be without that wage increase. So for me, it's women working flexibly, getting the money that you deserve for the jobs that you are doing. And if you are taking time out of the workforce for different responsibilities, that the government helps you with that and acknowledges that you deserve to have super paid on that leave as well. And we will continue to do that. Again, I think all of these areas have been left undealt with for too long, and we've taken a big, I don't know, I think it's probably the biggest impact on the budget in the 3 years we've been in has been paying aged care and early education and care workers a proper wage. And that will continue. So for me, it's that. We've got super on PPL. It's that, and it's again doing whatever we can to ensure that throughout your working life you're not penalised for some of those unpaid caring roles that women play, because that's what puts them behind.
Allegra Spender.
Look, I think what drives the gap, and so look, I look at the KPMG analysis, which basically says it's about 36% sort of undisclosed, which is really effectively gender discrimination. Around 24% is the type of job, and about 33% is caring and family. And so you kind of have to look at each of those in of it and go, well, how do you deal with each of those pieces? To talk about that sort of caring responsibility, I think the biggest issue is actually how do we change the culture so that we share the caring? This is, we have some of the most, what you see, with men's and women's sort of incomes, they're often pretty similar and sort of moving the same trajectory until people hit around 30, when people start to have kids, and that's when things really diverge. And I think that divergence in Australia is sort of quite profound and it's more significant than other countries. And so I think this is about how do you share the caring. Now, there's been some move forward on this with the government in this term to increase paid parental leave and increase the 4 weeks, the use it or lose it piece on paid parental leave, where the second parent, which is typically a male parent, has this 4 weeks of paid parental leave that they use it or lose it. But I actually think we really need to increase that so that we change the culture that it's mums looking after the kids, and I've been pushing for sort of 6 or 8 weeks, and I'll be honest, I was disappointed that they didn't come out with at least 6 weeks, so that men have confidence in looking after kids and get the joys. There's a lot of evidence to show this is good for men's mental health, it is good for the kids, and it's good for women's economic empowerment. So I think sharing the caring, changing that culture, and using the paid parental leave system as a major lever for that, I think is absolutely critical. Then it comes to, well, why aren't women in choosing jobs that are better paid? Some of it is exactly what Katy talked about, is making sure that the things that they do are actually remunerated for the value that they provide, and a big supporter of that increase in pay, for instance, in childcare. But I think also then it's areas such as how do we increase STEM take up with women? It's some work I used to do in my old job, is how to help get young girls interested in those sorts of careers and recognise that their skills are relevant and that they can also help the world using STEM skills. I don't know if we'll come to that as a later question, but I think that piece, and also supporting female entrepreneurs, again, another big gap and another way that women can build that economic empowerment and that wealth and that prosperity, which I think is really absolutely needed.
Larissa, I just want to get your comments quickly on that as well.
So the Greens are backing the union calls for paying women more, and there's an awful lot of female-dominated industries who are not paid as much as they're worth. and that valuing of women's work really needs to have some financial backing behind it. So we've backed in those union calls for essentially paying women more in those female-dominated sectors. Paid parental leave is a really important one. After many years of campaigning, we're so pleased that superannuation is now paid on paid parental leave. That's a great thing. But we also need to see that shared care proportion much higher, and the length of PPL much better. At the moment, part of the way of incentivising it's usually male partners to take the leave is to pay it at replacement wage. And so we think paid parental leave in Australia should be just as good as it is elsewhere around the world, and say make it for 52 weeks, pay it at replacement wage. The government would only pay a subset of that and the employer would top up the rest. But importantly, quarantine 12 weeks of it for the secondary carer, because that early contact with bub entrenches that sharing of what is subsequently the unpaid domestic care load that we know leads to women retiring into poverty after a lifetime of care. In relation to super specifically, we've also costed a policy that we would pay super on carer payments, that we would double the low income super tax offset, and that we would boost super for carers of kids and people with disabilities by $500 annually. So really acknowledging that there is a massive superannuation gap and that women are retiring into poverty. And the gender pay gap is another thing where we've seen some positive reforms, some good steps taken, but not quite as many as we need. Government shouldn't be having contracts with any business that has got a gender pay gap and isn't closing it. They've added that as one consideration now for government when they're thinking about who to give the contract to, but it should be a barrier. Unless you're closing a gender pay gap, you just shouldn't even be in the mix to get government money. And we also think that all big business should be required to close their gender pay gap, not just big businesses with over 500 employees. It's great that you're tracking whether you've got a pay gap, but you should be obliged to close it, and not just for those super big companies as well. So yeah, lots to do in that space.
Yeah.
Katala, can I just jump in on that? Because we do have gender pay gap publishing now for the first time that we've brought in, and it is making a big difference. And the gender pay gap has closed to, whilst it's too big still, but it has closed by 2 percentage points. And totally support Allegra on the shared care arrangements. And just, it's a bit unfortunate that the Liberal Party aren't here today, because that's really the choice. We're all sitting here and large, between the Greens and Labor and Independents, but Peter Dutton has made it clear that on those types of arrangements and on super, on PPL and things like that, he would leave it open to people to cash those arrangements out. So not actually backing in the sort of structural change that will drive the growth of women's assets, because I think at the election, that's the choice. It's between what we're offering and what Peter Dutton is offering.
Yeah. Good point. Okay, so on to another big topic in this conversation, which is gender responsive climate action. And despite the promises and hope that the Labor government hasn't really made significant inroads on climate change, or so says this reader, the coalition is pursuing a flawed position on nuclear power. A minority government with teal and or green influence seems like a golden opportunity for climate change to finally get the attention it needs. Why wouldn't or shouldn't voters vote teal or green, given the failure of the duopoly to address this crisis? Katy, I'll go to you first.
Okay, well, I don't agree with that analysis at all. And, I think, again, it goes back to my earlier point. It's not a choice between Labor and the Greens. It's a choice between Labor and Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. And so, we have a lot of talk here in the ACT about this so-called strategic voting and all the rest of it. But the more votes that Labor loses, the higher risk there is of a Dutton government. That's the simple way our political system works. But on the point that you make around climate change, like, we went to the election with a commitment around climate change and energy policy that we have implemented and legislated. And the contrast between what we want to do and what the opposition want to do couldn't be clearer in this. Their nuclear reactor kind of madness is really a smokescreen for underwriting coal and gas for much longer. We think we do need to continue to have gas that underpins the renewables. But Tanya Plibersek has approved 80 large-scale renewable projects in her time as Minister for the Environment, like an absolutely massive change to what happened under the former government. Now, and I'm sure Larissa will raise it because I always do around approvals for fossil fuel projects. Can I just be clear that where there has been no new coal approved coal-fired power station approved under the government, there have been extensions to existing projects, and that is to ensure that we can make steel for the renewable projects and also keep the power on for people. And so I often get frustrated at this because it's very easy to just say, I'll get rid of coal and gas. We have to build an energy system that can actually provide energy to people. We're doing that. We're moving to 82% renewables. We're on track to do that. And the biggest risk to our energy system right now is coal-fired power stations that keep breaking down. And that's why we need to keep the focus on renewables, but they have to be firmed by batteries, hydro and gas in the short term. And AEMO has been very clear about this. So I can't think of another government that's done more in 3 years to deal with, a lack of attention in this space. And it's very clear that, the contest between Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese is one that wants coal, gas, and then in the future, expensive nuclear, or continuing on what we have been trying to do this term in it seriously, investing in renewables and the future of our energy system here. I get a bit frustrated when people say that we haven't done enough in 2.5 years compared to what was not done for a decade under the former government.
Larissa Waters, your comments on that?
Yeah, well, look, it's unfortunate that we have seen over 30 new coal and gas projects approved under this term of government because people voted for climate action and they know we've got really good quality renewables that are job rich, that make energy cheaper for homes, that can keep the lights on, and they can't understand why there's still approvals for coal and gas mines. And just 48 hours ago, the massive Santos Barossa gas project was approved by this federal government, and it's one of the biggest gas climate bombs that you could conceive of. So I find that really inconsistent with what has been a fairly pro-renewable stance under this term of government. So, good job on the renewables, really bad job approving new coal and gas. You're going to cancel each other out if you keep doing that. So we've said clearly no new coal and gas because we've got the clean renewable energy technology that we know can do the job. We don't need the new coal and gas. And we've also said let's stop those coal and gas companies donating to political parties, because we think that that's why they've got so much political power, is because they're so generous and they don't discriminate. They give it to all political parties, not the Greens. We don't take their money. And we think if you got rid of those dirty donations, then there might be a better chance of the science dictating people's decisions. We've also said let's end native forest logging because our forests are precious. They're important for the climate, they're important for wildlife, and we've got other plantation means of meeting our timber requirements. And we've also said that we want to help homes get solar, particularly renters, be able to get solar by incentivising landlords to pop solar on the roof. And for homes that have already got solar, we've announced that there'd be a grant program for batteries, because that's really the next instalment in keeping your bills down and making sure that you're using as much clean renewable energy as you can. So we think that there's been some good things done, but really disappointed that there's been such a commitment to coal and gas and nuclear. Agree there. It's a total smokescreen just to keep coal in the system for longer. It's ridiculous. It's expensive. It's dangerous. It's not going to happen. It's actually illegal, and they'd need the Senate to overturn that ban, and they're not going to get the numbers in the Senate. So, but yeah, lots more work to be done on climate. But I think in a minority government, the Greens, we pushed for world-leading climate laws, and we worked with Labor last time in 2010 to get that. We've got a track record of being able to do that, and I'm optimistic that we can make some good climate gains in the next term of government.
Thank you, Larissa. And I know that I've said this a million times throughout this webinar, but I'm very conscious of time now because we are nearly at the end of it. That hour has gone very, very quickly. But Allegra, I really am keen to hear your thoughts on that question as well. But also to go to Larissa's point on nuclear, given the position you are in, would you ever back a nuclear framework like the one the coalition is pursuing?
Look, I mean, to start on nuclear, I'm technology agnostic, I'll be honest, in terms of how do we make the energy transition, but I don't think nuclear makes sense in Australia. And that is because it is too slow, too expensive. And, we actually have some of the best solar resources in particular around the world, which means, a solar panel here can create 2 to 3 times more electricity than it can in a place like Japan or Germany. We have enormous competitive advantage in this space. So I think that it doesn't make sense to go down the nuclear route, and I think we need to stay the course. I think we are making progress. I do want to give credit to the government. I've been proud to work in this parliament to finally, I always describe climate policy, it's like we've turned the ship around, we're finally pointing in the right direction. For God's sake, let's just keep on going. And, let's see if we can actually beat the target for 2030 for 43% reduction. We need to have a strong target for 2035 within the Climate Change Authority's recommendations of what we can do, but which is also, what we can deliver here and is also aligned with the science. That's what I think we need to do in the next parliament, as well as fix our broken environmental laws, because I think that actually is hampering both our protection of our flora and fauna. It is also hampering, businesses being able to build the renewable energy infrastructure that we need. So, and other pieces. So there's a huge amount of work that needs to happen in the next parliament. For me, I guess I see myself on the crossbench as an independent is to be able to say, look, I'll work with any government on the day on policies that make a difference. And, in this government, because we talked briefly about independence, what you can do as an independent is you can sort of advocate on the issues that matter. And so, for instance, on fuel efficiency standards, a lot of the independents advocated and tried to create the space for the government to do the right thing, which they have done in terms of bringing fuel efficiency standards in. You can legislate, make legislation better, and again, worked with the government on and strengthening the Climate Change Act. And then it's about voting every single time on the basis of, where's the evidence. And so, whatever shape the parliament is next time, if I have the privilege of being part of it, that's what I'll be doing on climate action. And particularly, again, a bit like Larissa, with a look to renters and apartment dwellers, because there are a lot of those in my electorate, and they're somewhat locked out at the moment of that transition.
Now, there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to today, and I am really keen to try to collate a lot of the questions that have come through the chat box and also ones that we didn't get to that I have here. But in the essence of time, I want to wrap up with one final question, which would be, what is the one thing you want women to keep in mind before casting their vote on May 3rd? Larissa Waters, we'll start with you.
Well, women are expert multitaskers, so I want them to think about making sure that they are financially secure, that they are safe, and that they're equal, and that they're represented in Parliament. I think at the moment we've still got a predominance of older white gentlemen. We need more women of colour. We need more women with disability. We need more women from all sorts of different backgrounds in Parliament so that we've got lived experience helping guide those decisions. But I just think, just remember that you are powerful and your vote matters, and you can cast it in a way that protects your interests and those of all of your friends, family and daughters.
Katy Gallagher.
Yeah, I think women voters are smart voters, and I would argue that there is a real contrast and a contest between the two parties that would form government. And so for women to take their time and have a look at what each party is offering, to look at the policies that women care about, so Medicare, childcare, economic security, the issues like climate, which has been such a feature of the discussion, and I see on the Q&A today, women are generous voters. And I think when you look at it with that generosity and care for community, there is only really one choice at this election. Labor. In case you didn't get the hint.
Subtle end there. Allegra Spender, your final comments.
Look, I was going to say women have power. I hold a seat that has never had a woman run a full term, and never had anyone apart from a Liberal have a full term for the last 100 years, 125 years since Federation. So I'm the first one. That came out of a bunch of women in this electorate saying, we believe we can do something different. We've seen what happened with Zali Steggler over there. We think we can do that here. So I think that, be the change you want to see in the world, and vote like it. And then, and I think vote for the long term, because I think there are, it's hard to, and sometimes you don't feel like you have the power to vote for the long term. But I think it is really, really important. But, be the change, and you've got more power than you think. I always think you stand up, you get together, and you get informed like you are today. That's how real world change happens.
I want to thank you all so much for joining us today, and to our panelists, Allegra Spender, Senator Katy Gallagher, and Senator Larissa Waters, for being part of a really, really robust, respectful discussion, and people want to see more of it, and we've seen that in the chat box as well. We hope it has helped shed light on some of the key issues at play in the lead up to the election, and a reminder that this session will be uploaded to Women's Agenda's YouTube channel this afternoon and will remain there until the election, so feel free to revisit or share it with others. Thanks again for tuning in.